Water only? The boy barely looked up, clutching his battered backpack like a shield. In a town where kindness was rare and judgment came easy, one waitress made a quiet decision to feed a boy who never asked for help and never asked for pity. She didn't know his name, she didn't know his story. But every morning she placed a plate of pancakes in front of him without asking questions. What she didn't know was that the boy was hiding a devastating secret, and that her simple act of kindness would one day bring black SUVs saluting soldiers and a letter that would change her life forever. This is the true power of unseen kindness. This is the story of a plate of pancakes and a legacy that would never be forgotten. Now, before we dive deeper, please subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now, let's get back to the story. Water only? Charlotte Evans knelt beside the booth, pen poised over her pad, forcing a bright smile to hide the quiet twist in her chest. The boy sitting there didn't look up. He just nodded once, a stiff, mechanical motion, and hugged his frayed backpack closer to his side. His book, some battered fantasy novel, was splayed open in front of him, but his eyes weren't moving across the page. They were fixed warily on the door, on the windows, on the space between every loud, oblivious diner patron in the room. Charlotte hesitated a second longer than necessary, then scribbled water on her pad like it mattered, straightened up, and walked briskly back to the counter. Maggie's Café had always been a kind of halfway place, too small to be a real restaurant, too proud to admit it was just another greasy spoon. The cracked red booths smelled of bacon grease and coffee grounds. The jukebox in the corner hadn't worked in years, but no one seemed to mind. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and they noticed strangers, especially tiny ones with hollow cheeks and shoes a size too big. Charlotte filled a paper cup with water, stabbed a straw into it, and walked it back over. She set it down with a gentle clink. "Here you go, sweetheart," she said softly. The boy barely moved. His hand flickered toward the cup like a lizard's tongue, pulling it close. Another stiff nod, that was all. No thank you, no glance up, just silence. Later, after the breakfast rush faded into a haze of clinking plates and half-wiped tables, Charlotte found herself watching the boy. Not in a nosy way, just with the kind of lingering sadness that came from knowing what it meant to be young and invisible. It became a pattern. Every morning, at precisely 7:15, he would push open the door with both hands, slip inside like a ghost, and take the same booth, the one in the back corner, where he could see both exits. He would order only water, drink it slowly, and flip pages he wasn't really reading. He never spoke unless spoken to, never laughed, never touched the battered tips jar Charlotte kept next to the register, even though sometimes customers would leave quarters and pennies behind, like forgotten crumbs. On the fourth morning, as Charlotte was refilling coffee for Old Man Breyer at the counter, she heard a sharp comment float across the diner. "Look at that. Kid probably casing the place for a free handout." It came from a man in a business suit, tapping away at a laptop and nursing his third black coffee. Charlotte said nothing. She just tightened her grip on the coffee pot until her knuckles went white, then poured another cup for Breyer without a word. Some people, she knew, couldn't see hunger unless it came with dirt smudges and ripped clothing. But hunger wore lots of faces, some neat, some polite, some too proud to beg. On the 15th morning, the accident happened. Charlotte was rushing back from the kitchen, balancing 2 plates in one hand and a third tucked precariously along her arm, when her foot caught on a loose mat. She stumbled, swearing under her breath, and a plate of pancakes slid dangerously sideways. She managed to right herself, but the plate tumbled onto the nearest table, the boy's table. His book snapped shut instinctively as he flinched away from the plate. A small mountain of golden, fluffy pancakes stared back at him. Steam curled from the butter, melting into syrupy pools. Charlotte caught her breath and smiled, flushing pink. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sweetheart. Kitchen must have made an extra order. No sense wasting good food, right?" She nudged the plate a little closer to him with her knuckles, trying not to seem like she was watching him too hard. "You don't have to eat it if you don't want. Just figured better here than in the trash." For a moment she thought he'd bolt. His hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles pale. His eyes flicked toward the door. But then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. The smell of syrup. The clatter of plates around him. The growl of a stomach too long ignored. Slowly, warily, the boy picked up his fork. He ate with the cautious quickness of someone who wasn't used to hot food lasting long. Every few seconds, he shot nervous glances around the diner, as if someone might yank the plate away, declare it a mistake, accuse him of theft. Charlotte busied herself wiping down tables nearby, pretending not to notice, but her chest tightened with every bite he took. When she returned 10 minutes later to clear the table, the plate was licked clean, save for a few stubborn syrup streaks. The boy didn't say anything, didn't meet her eyes, but as she bent to collect the plate, she heard the smallest whisper, "Thank you." 2 syllables, so quiet she almost thought she imagined it. She didn't say anything back, didn't kneel down or ask for his name. Just smiled, soft and quick, and slipped away toward the kitchen. From that morning on, it became their ritual. Some mornings it was scrambled eggs with toast, other days oatmeal with a swirl of brown sugar. Once, when the weather turned bitter, Charlotte added a mug of hot cocoa, pretending it had been a mistake order meant for someone else. The boy never asked for the food, never demanded anything, but he ate every bite, and every day, just before he left, he would whisper the same words, "Thank you," always the same. Always soft enough that no one else could hear. Charlotte never pressed, never sat across from him or pried into his silence. She didn't need to know the details, she knew enough. There was hunger, and there was someone who needed to be seen. The world didn't need more questions. It needed more pancakes. One morning, as she was refilling the salt shakers, Debbie, the breakfast cook who had worked there since Maggie's first opened, leaned against the pass window and jerked her chin toward the corner booth. "You know he ain't your responsibility, right?" she said gruffly, wiping her hands on her apron. Charlotte shrugged without looking up. "Maybe he's nobody's responsibility," Debbie snorted. "You feed a stray, it'll stick around till the food runs out. Then it's gone. Don't get attached, kiddo." Charlotte smiled a little to herself. She wasn't trying to keep him. She was just trying to make sure that, for 40 minutes each morning, he didn't have to feel the gnaw of emptiness. "You planning to adopt him or something?" The words hit Charlotte like a slap, even though Harold Green, a grizzled old regular who sat at the counter every morning with his crossword puzzle and black coffee, had said them with a chuckle. Not malice. Charlotte kept wiping the same spot on the counter, pretending not to hear. "Heard he's been coming in every day," Harold said louder, squinting up at her. "Eating real good, too. Mighty generous of you, girl. But charity's a funny thing. Stick around too long, it turns into a leash." Around him, the other early birds laughed, a low, knowing sound that buzzed under the clink of spoons and forks. Charlotte pressed her lips together, offering a brittle smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just leftovers, Harold," she said lightly. "Better in a stomach than the trash." Harold shrugged and went back to his puzzle, but the words had already done their work. By lunchtime, the whispers spread. "She's setting herself up for trouble," murmured a woman with teased blonde hair and a mouth always ready to purse in disapproval. "That boy's gonna bring friends soon, you'll see. Then it's a feeding line. Wouldn't be surprised if he's casing the place." Charlotte moved through the diner like a ghost, filling coffee, balancing plates, smiling at customers who talked about her like she wasn't even there. Every whisper tightened a knot in her stomach, but when the boy arrived the next morning, shivering a little from the bitter wind outside, a worn hoodie barely shielding his thin arms, Charlotte already had a plate waiting for him. Pancakes, 2 eggs over easy, and a slice of ham steaming on the chipped porcelain plate. The boy's eyes widened slightly, almost imperceptibly. He said nothing, just sat down quietly, tucked into the food like he hadn't eaten since the day before. In the back, Debbie cornered Charlotte after her shift, arms crossed over her chest, eyes sharp. "You can't save 'em all, kid," she said, voice low but firm. "I know what you're trying to do and it's noble, but the world's not kind to strays. It chews 'em up and spits 'em out." Charlotte didn't answer. She just untied her apron, folded it neatly, and placed it in the locker before heading home, her shoes scuffing along the cracked linoleum floor. That night, in the tiny apartment above the bookstore, Charlotte sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the old wooden box she kept hidden under the floorboard. Inside were yellowed photos. Her mother's smiling face, her father's arm slung proudly around her shoulder before he left for a desert war she was too young to understand. Beneath them, her father's journal. She thumbed through it absently, stopping at a familiar page. Gave a starving kid half my ration today. Might have been stupid, might have gotten us caught. But hell, if kindness makes me a fool, I'll be the proudest damn fool there is. Charlotte closed her eyes, the lump in her throat thickening. Her father hadn't survived that war. But the memory of who he had been, the kindness that had defined him, survived in her. And she refused to let it die. The next morning, despite the murmurs, despite the sidelong glances, Charlotte placed another plate of hot food at the boy's booth. When he finished, he looked up, really looked at her, for the first time. Just a flicker of a glance. But it was enough. Enough to know that for one small soul in a brutal world, kindness still mattered. She would bear the whispers, she would bear the judgment. Because hunger didn't need permission, it just needed someone to notice. Charlotte, office, now. The voice snapped across the half-empty diner like the crack of a whip. Charlotte froze, mid-pour, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her hand. She forced a neutral smile onto her face, set the pot down carefully on the counter, and wiped her hands on her apron as she walked toward the back. Mr. Grayson's office was barely bigger than a broom closet, a cracked plastic desk, a flickering fluorescent bulb overhead, a coffee-stained calendar, 2 years out of date still pinned to the wall. The manager sat behind the desk, his thick fingers drumming impatiently against the laminate. His thinning hair was slicked back as always, but a bead of sweat trickled down his temple. He didn't offer her a seat. "I've been watching," he said, without preamble. His voice was low but sharp, like a rusted blade. "Watching you with that kid." Charlotte kept her hands folded tightly in front of her apron, her gaze steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. "You know I can't have employees giving away free meals," Mr. Grayson continued, leaning forward. "Bad for business. Sets a precedent. If word gets out we're running a charity kitchen, we'll have a line out the door." Charlotte swallowed hard. "I'll cover the cost myself," she said quietly. "Out of my tips." Grayson's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. "From your tips, Charlotte? Your tips barely cover your rent." "It's my choice," she said, her voice firmer now, the flicker of steel beneath the soft words. For a long, uncomfortable moment, Mr. Grayson just stared at her, like he was trying to figure out if she was stupid or stubborn or something worse. Finally, he sighed, running a hand down his face. "Fine. 1 meal a day, no more. If it affects your work, or if that kid causes trouble, it stops. Immediately. Understood?" Charlotte nodded once, short and sharp. Relief flooded through her. Not joy, not gratitude, but something steadier. A grim sort of determination. She left the office with her head held high, though her knees felt like water. Later, when she slipped a few crumpled bills into the extra meal jar she hid beneath the counter, Charlotte felt the weight of the decision settle into her bones. Every dollar spent on him meant one less for herself. For new shoes when hers finally gave out, for the dentist appointment she kept rescheduling, for the winter coat she desperately needed before the Nebraska winds turned savage. But she didn't hesitate. Some costs, she thought, were worth paying. The next morning, she placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast at the boy's booth before he even asked for water. As she turned away, she caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, the boy's hands hovering for a second over the plate before pulling it close in a fast, almost guilty motion. He ate like someone half expecting the food to be snatched away. And when he finished, he whispered his usual shy, almost invisible, "Thank you." That tiny broken voice was all the payment Charlotte needed. But the town noticed. Oh, they noticed. A woman in a bright pink sweater, a regular whose name Charlotte didn't know and didn't want to, leaned across her table as Charlotte refilled her coffee later that week. "You know," the woman said with a sugar-sweet smile, "in my day, we taught children to earn their meals." Charlotte kept her smile polite, her hands steady, her voice neutral. "Maybe some things are worth giving without being earned." The woman sniffed, unimpressed, and went back to buttering her toast. The murmurs grew louder, nastier. Feeding strays just teaches them to expect handouts. Bet his parents are watching, laughing it up. Wouldn't be surprised if she's getting scammed. Charlotte bore it all in silence. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself, because kindness, she believed, wasn't something that needed defending. It either stood on its own or it didn't. And in the middle of that noisy, judgmental diner where people gossiped over sausage links and biscuits and gravy, Charlotte quietly placed another plate down at the corner booth. Pancakes today? Extra syrup? The boy looked up this time, just for a second. Their eyes met. Something passed between them, something fragile, something real. Charlotte smiled softly. The boy, incredibly, almost smiled back. Almost. It was enough. Enough to keep her going, enough to make the whispers meaningless. Because for 45 minutes every morning, one small, lonely boy wasn't invisible anymore. And neither, maybe, was she. "Where's your little stray today?" The words floated casually from a booth near the window, tossed out by a trucker in a battered cap, more out of habit than cruelty. But Charlotte's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. She turned, scanning the diner instinctively, though she already knew. The booth in the corner was empty. The boy was gone. At first she told herself it was nothing. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he missed the bus. Maybe, just maybe, he was staying home because the morning air had turned sharp and cold overnight, scraping thin jackets and exposed skin like knives. Still, she prepared his usual plate. 2 pancakes, a strip of bacon, a glass of milk. She set it carefully at his booth, smoothing the napkin as if he might walk in any second. But the minutes dragged on. The breakfast rush ebbed and flowed, and the plate grew cold. Debbie passed by once, casting a sidelong glance at the untouched food. "Kid moved on," she muttered, not unkindly. "They always do." Charlotte said nothing. She wrapped the plate in foil before closing time, tucking it under her arm as she walked home through the gathering dusk. She couldn't bring herself to throw it away. The next morning, she waited again. No boy. The morning after that, nothing. Each day, the untouched booth felt heavier, more accusing. Each empty morning chipped a little more from her heart. Kathy, one of the waitresses from the afternoon shift, stopped wiping the counter long enough to sigh dramatically one afternoon. "Should have known better," she said, loud enough for Charlotte to hear. "Can't save everyone. Kid probably found a new free ride somewhere." The cruel part wasn't her words. It was how normal they sounded. Like kindness was a childish mistake everyone expected you to outgrow. Still, Charlotte prepared the plate every morning, just in case. Customers noticed. They whispered more now, not just about the boy, but about her. About how Charlotte was wasting food. About how she was naive, sentimental, ridiculous. And then the Facebook post appeared. One of the lunchtime customers, a woman who spent more time on her phone than eating, snapped a picture of the empty booth with the cold plate sitting there. Posted it online with a sneering caption, "Maggie's Café, now serving imaginary friends. Maybe next week they'll start handing out meals to ghosts." The post went viral, at least by small-town standards. Snide comments flooded in. "Publicity stunt. Bet they throw the food away and claim a tax write-off. Feeding strays just teaches them to stay weak." Charlotte saw it all. She never responded, never defended herself. But the words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. That night, curled on her battered couch, the flickering light of her cracked phone screen illuminating the room, Charlotte stared at the ugly comments and felt a hollow ache spread through her. Was she foolish? Was she naive? Had she let her heart blind her? Seeking comfort, she pulled out the old wooden box from under the bed. She opened her father's journal, flipping to the page she always did when the world felt too sharp, too cruel. "Shared half my meal with a local kid today. Johnson called me crazy. Maybe he's right. But the look on that boy's face. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's a light. Doesn't matter if it gets noticed. Doesn't matter if it's returned. It just has to exist." Charlotte closed the book gently, her thumb tracing the faded ink. No, she wasn't foolish. She hadn't been wrong. Kindness didn't need an audience. Kindness didn't demand a return. It was enough to exist. She decided then, if the boy ever came back even once, he would find a plate waiting for him. Warm. Ready. Without conditions. Because hunger wasn't just about food. It was about being seen. About not being invisible. And Charlotte Evans, against all odds, still believed that seeing someone, truly seeing them, was an act worth defending. no matter how many people laughed, no matter how many plates went cold. The first sign was the silence. Charlotte had just finished refilling the sugar dispensers when she noticed it. The sudden, unnatural hush that rolled through Maggie's cafe like a wave. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Conversations cut off mid-laugh. Every head turned toward the front window, eyes wide. Charlotte, heart thudding, followed their gaze. Outside, 4 gleaming black SUVs with government plates pulled into the cracked parking lot, maneuvering with the precision of a military drill. The vehicles fanned out, forming a tight arc around the entrance. For a moment, nothing happened. The engines idled, low and menacing. Charlotte wiped her hands on her apron, trying to steady her breathing. She had seen plenty of strange things at Maggie's over the years. A cow loose on Main Street, a family of tourists in matching Elvis shirts, even once a wedding proposal involving 3 clowns and a mariachi band. But this was different. From the lead SUV, a man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a deep blue dress uniform so crisp it looked like it could cut glass. Rows of metals gleamed against his chest, catching the weak morning sun and throwing it back in sharp, blinding flashes. A second man exited behind him, younger, but with the same hard-set jaw, the same alert, coiled energy. They moved in perfect sync, crossing the lot toward the diner's front door. The bell above the entrance jangled sharply as they stepped inside, and for a moment, the only sound in the diner was the low, persistent hum of the ancient refrigerator behind the counter. Mr. Grayson came scuttling out of the back office, smoothing his tie nervously. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he croaked, voice higher than normal. The older man removed his cap, tucking it neatly under his arm. He surveyed the diner with piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. "I'm looking for someone who works here," he said, his voice deep and commanding, but not unkind. "A woman named Charlotte Evans." Charlotte stiffened. Every eye in the place turned to her. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing down on her like a physical force. Slowly, she stepped forward, her palms damp against the rough fabric of her apron. "I'm Charlotte," she said, voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. The man nodded once. "Colonel Matthew Hayes," he introduced himself. "United States Army Special Forces Command." He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew an envelope, crisp, heavy, official. "And I'm here because of a promise," he said. The words hung there, strange and heavy, vibrating in the stillness. Charlotte blinked at him, bewildered. Colonel Hayes took a step closer, holding out the envelope. "This is a letter from the Commanding General of Special Forces Operations," he said. "And a personal message from the family of Master Sergeant Joshua Thompson." The name meant nothing at first. Charlotte's mind raced, trying to place it. Then Colonel Hayes added gently, "Joshua Thompson, father of Noah Thompson, the boy you've been feeding." The floor seemed to shift under Charlotte's feet. The diner tilted. Her mouth went dry. "Noah, the boy with the wary eyes and the hollow cheeks, and the thank you whispered so quietly it almost broke her." The world around her faded. The diner, the customers, the cracked booths, and the flickering neon sign, until it was just her and the colonel and the truth unraveling between them. "I don't understand," she whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for the envelope. Is Noah okay?" Colonel Hayes' stern expression softened. "He's safe," he said quietly. "He's living with his grandparents in Colorado now." Charlotte exhaled shakily, a tear slipping down her cheek before she could stop it. But the colonel wasn't finished. "For nearly 3 months," he said, voice thickening, "Noah came here every morning before school, alone, hungry, after his mother left him following his father's deployment." A soft gasp rippled through the diner. Charlotte felt her knees buckle slightly. She gripped the counter behind her to stay upright. "Sergeant Thompson was deployed on a classified mission overseas," Colonel Hayes continued. "He didn't know that his wife had abandoned their son." He paused, swallowing hard. "And when Sergeant Thompson fell 2 months ago, he left a final request. Find the woman who fed my boy." Charlotte stared at him, the envelope crinkling in her hands. She opened it with shaking fingers, pulling out a folded sheet of paper, the handwriting neat but unmistakably worn by emotion. "If I don't make it home," the letter read, "please find the woman who fed my son. Tell her she didn't just feed a child, she preserved a soldier's peace of mind in his darkest hours." Tears blurred the words. Charlotte pressed the paper to her chest, overwhelmed by a grief she didn't know how to carry. Around her, the diner sat in stunned silence. Even the customers who had mocked her, who had whispered behind her back, sat frozen, their faces pale, stricken. Colonel Hayes snapped to attention, a sharp, formal salute, right there in the middle of Maggie's Café. Behind him, the younger officer did the same. Through the windows, Charlotte could see the soldiers standing by the SUVs following suit, their salutes crisp and unwavering. "For preserving the dignity of a soldier's son," Colonel Hayes said, his voice rough with emotion, "on behalf of the United States Army Special Forces, we thank you." Charlotte, hands trembling, returned the colonel's gaze through a blur of tears. She had never asked for thanks, never asked for recognition. She had just seen a boy who needed to be seen, and in doing so, she had changed a life. Maybe more than one, maybe her own. The letter crumpled softly in her hands as she finally found her voice. "I didn't know," she whispered. I couldn't let him be hungry." Colonel Hayes smiled then, a rare, weary, beautiful smile. "Sometimes," he said, "that's enough." No one moved, not right away. The heavy silence after Colonel Hayes's salute seemed to stretch into forever, thick as syrup, clinging to every corner of Maggie's Café. Charlotte stood frozen, clutching Sergeant Thompson's letter to her chest like a lifeline, feeling the raw truth of it pounding in her ears. Across the room, Harold Green, the man who once joked about adopting strays, slowly lowered his coffee cup to the table. His hands were trembling. The woman in the bright pink sweater, who had once sniffed at Charlotte's supposed foolishness, sat rigid, her face drained of color, her fork dangling limply from her fingers. Even Mr. Grayson, who had once scolded her behind closed doors for wasting food, stared at Charlotte with something almost like awe or guilt. Colonel Hayes and his men pivoted sharply, the soles of their boots clicking in perfect unison, and exited the diner with military precision. The bell above the door chimed softly in their wake, the sound absurdly small after the gravity they left behind. For a moment longer, nobody spoke, nobody moved. Then slowly, almost timidly, Harold stood up. He placed a crumpled $20 bill on the counter, far more than his usual coffee and toast deserved. "Keep the change," he muttered hoarsely, not meeting Charlotte's eyes. One by one, others followed. A steady trickle at first. Small gestures, larger tips than usual, murmured words of thanks, brief, uncomfortable glances, as if they couldn't bear to look directly at the reflection of their own smallness. By the time the lunch rush arrived, Maggie's Café wasn't just a place that served pancakes and bacon anymore. It was something else. Something different. The regulars asked to sit in Charlotte's section. People who had once whispered about her charity now left handwritten notes on their receipts. "Thank you for reminding us. My boy's in the Navy. Your kindness gives me hope. God bless you for seeing him." Mr. Grayson, never one for speeches, quietly removed the faded "No outside food" sign from the window. 2 days later, he hung a small American flag above the corner booth. The booth where Noah had once sat, hunched over his battered book. Beneath the flag, a discreet brass plaque appeared, reserved for those who serve, and the families who wait. Charlotte never saw who had paid for it, but she had her suspicions. The booth was never empty again. Veterans passing through town sat there, sometimes with their families, sometimes alone. Sometimes, Charlotte would find a single coin or a folded note tucked under the salt shaker. Small, silent tributes left behind. The same Facebook group that had once mocked her posted a new picture. This time, it was the booth, the flag, the plaque, and a copy of Sergeant Thompson's letter. The post went viral again, but this time, it was different. Thousands of shares, tens of thousands of comments, all pouring love, gratitude, and respect. The story leapt from Facebook to local news, then from local news to national. Charlotte's face, flushed with embarrassment, caught mid-laugh behind the counter, ended up on TV screens she would never see in cities she would never visit. But she didn't care about the attention. She cared about the mornings when soldiers passing through town would stop in for coffee, when parents wrangling noisy toddlers would sit at the booth and nod at the plaque with misty eyes, when someone would quietly place a few extra dollars in the tip jar and murmur, "for someone who might need it more." That was the real change. The only change that mattered. Debbie, Wiping down the counter one slow afternoon, nudged Charlotte with her elbow. "You did this, you know," she said gruffly. Charlotte shook her head. "I didn't do anything special," she said. Debbie snorted. "Exactly. That's what makes it special." Charlotte smiled, the kind of smile that came from deep inside, the kind she hadn't felt in years, the kind that didn't care about gossip or judgment or who was watching. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, carrying the first scent of winter. Inside, Maggie's Café glowed, warm, steady, unshaken. And Charlotte Evans, the quiet waitress no one had truly seen before, stood at the heart of it all. Not a hero, not a savior, just someone who believed a plate of pancakes and an open heart could change the world. One small kindness at a time. The envelope was small, plain. No return address. Just Maggie's Café scribbled carefully in a child's handwriting across the front. Charlotte found it tucked between the morning mail, sandwiched between invoices and supply orders as she unlocked the door just before sunrise. The air still carried a bite, and the diner smelled of cold grease and yesterday's coffee. She stared at the envelope for a long moment, something tightening in her chest. Her fingers trembled as she slid it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper. The edges crumpled slightly as if it had been folded and unfolded 100 times before it found its way to her. The handwriting was careful but uneven, the determined strokes of a child trying to make every word perfect. Charlotte's eyes blurred before she reached the second line. It read, "Dear Miss Charlotte, I didn't know your name until that day the soldiers came. But every morning for all those months, you were the only person who looked at me like I wasn't broken or invisible. My dad always said, real heroes don't wear capes, they wear uniforms. I think maybe sometimes they wear aprons too. When my dad stopped writing letters, I thought maybe the world forgot both of us. But you didn't. You remembered me, even when I couldn't tell you why I was alone. You made me pancakes when I couldn't ask. You made me feel like maybe I wasn't so lost after all. Grandma says I should try to be happy again. Grandpa's teaching me how to fish. I'm trying. I miss my dad. Sometimes I miss your pancakes more than anything. Thank you for not asking questions when I couldn't give answers. You were my safe place. Your friend, Noah Thompson. P.S. I finished the book I was reading. It had a happy ending, after all." Charlotte pressed the letter to her heart, tears slipping freely down her cheeks, unchecked. The words weren't elegant. They weren't polished. But they were raw, pure, real. And they carried more weight than any medal, any plaque, any viral Facebook post. Behind the counter, Charlotte found an empty frame she kept tucked away for when the walls needed refreshing. She slipped Noah's letter inside, not hanging it prominently like some trophy, but quietly near the register. A private reminder, a sacred promise. When customers noticed and asked about it, Charlotte only smiled and said, "Just a thank you note from a special customer." No more explanations, no grand speeches. Some things didn't need to be shouted. They were felt, deep in the marrow, in the spaces where grief and hope braided themselves together. Days passed. The booth beneath the flag was never empty. Sometimes veterans sat there alone, lost in memories. Sometimes tired parents sat there, their arms heavy with the weight of deployment, their eyes hollow from waiting. And sometimes, Charlotte caught herself glancing at the door at 7:15, half expecting to see a small boy with a battered backpack and wary eyes push his way inside. He never came, but his letter stayed. A quiet echo of a kindness shared in silence, a reminder that once when the world turned sharp and cruel, someone had been brave enough to offer pancakes. And hope. No questions asked. Later that evening, after closing, Charlotte sat alone in the dim light of the diner, the silence heavy but no longer lonely. She reread Noah's letter again, the words softening something inside her she hadn't even realized was still bruised. She tucked the challenge coin from the Special Forces into her apron pocket, feeling its cool, solid weight against her skin. A promise, a memory, a quiet, unbreakable bond. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, brushing the cracked parking lot with white. Inside, Maggie's Café glowed warm against the gathering cold, and in a booth in the corner, under a flag that whispered of service and sacrifice, kindness lived. Unseen by many, but unforgettable to the ones who needed it most. It began with a coin. 3 days after Noah's letter arrived, Charlotte found it. tucked carefully under the salt shaker at the corner booth. It wasn't just any coin. It was a challenge coin, the kind soldiers carried, passed hand to hand in moments too big for words. One side bore the insignia of the United States Army Special Forces. The other side engraved simply, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Charlotte turned it over slowly in her hand, the heavy, cool metal warming against her palm. She looked around the diner, but the breakfast rush had come and gone, and there was no one left to claim it. No note, no explanation, just the silent, unmistakable message, "We remember." The next morning, another token appeared. A patch, tattered but carefully folded, from the 82nd Airborne Division, left under a coffee cup tucked beneath a clean napkin. A week later, a Marine Corps pin. Then a Navy SEAL coin. An Air Force squadron badge. They came from everywhere. Soldiers passing through town, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, left behind pieces of themselves, small, weighty things. Tokens of gratitude for something most of them would never have the words to name. Charlotte cleared tables quietly, finding each new treasure with a lump in her throat. She didn't display them on a shrine or a shelf. Instead, she pinned them, one by one, to a small corkboard behind the counter. No labels, no announcements, just a quiet gathering of honor, tucked between the coffee pots and the pastry case. Over time, the board filled. Badges from units she couldn't even pronounce. Medals whose colors she didn't recognize. Coins worn smooth by hands that had seen too much, survived too much. Customers started to notice. Parents pointed them out to their children. Veterans lingered a little longer near the counter, their fingers brushing the tokens with reverent tenderness. Sometimes, they left quietly. Sometimes they pressed Charlotte's hand briefly across the counter, a silent thank you without needing to explain why. Mr. Grayson, who once grumbled about free meals and bad business, surprised everyone when he personally added a framed sign above the corkboard, in honor of those who serve and those who stand waiting at home. Kindness matters. Always. Nobody in the diner talked much about the board, but it was there. Growing, breathing, living. One Thursday afternoon, a school group came through for lunch after a field trip. 30 noisy kids crammed into the booths, chattering and laughing, their backpacks slung carelessly across the aisles. Charlotte moved through them like a lighthouse in a storm, steady, smiling, refilling sodas and delivering plates of burgers and fries. Near the end of the meal, a small girl with curious green eyes tugged at Charlotte's apron. "Miss Charlotte," she said solemnly, "my daddy says you're a hero. Do you feel like one?" Charlotte knelt to meet the girl's gaze. She smiled. A real smile, soft and sad and grateful all at once. "No, sweetheart," she said, "I'm not a hero." She smoothed a strand of hair behind the girl's ear. "I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be hungry." The girl frowned thoughtfully, as if trying to puzzle out this new kind of math, where being full meant more than food, and kindness weighed more than medals. Her teacher, a young woman with tired eyes and a quiet grace, approached and laid a gentle hand on Charlotte's shoulder. "We teach them all the wrong heroes sometimes," she said softly. Charlotte met her gaze, and saw in it the same truth that had driven her all these months. The same truth she saw in Noah's hollow cheeks, the same truth that lived in her father's tattered journal, the same truth pinned to the wall behind the counter, stitched into every patch and coin and token left behind. Kindness was a quiet thing, but it outlived everything else. That night, after the diner closed and the last customer drifted into the cold, Charlotte stood behind the counter, staring at the wall of tokens. She let her hand brush over them one by one, each a story, each a life touched, each a reminder that even if no one remembered her name, they would remember the kindness. They would remember that when one small boy sat alone, invisible to the world, someone saw him, and fed him, and loved him, without asking for anything back. Outside, the town slept under a fresh dusting of snow. Inside, Maggie's Café glowed steady and warm. And behind the counter, Charlotte Evans, the waitress nobody had seen for so long, stood quietly weaving her own kind of legacy. One unnoticed, unspectacular act at a time. One boy. One pancake. One life. At a time. "You're doing a fundraiser now?" Charlotte blinked at Mr. Grayson, not sure she'd heard him correctly. The manager stood awkwardly near the counter, scratching the back of his neck, eyes darting everywhere but at her. In his hands, he held a stack of paper flyers, homemade, a little crooked, but bright with hope. At the top, in bold letters, fundraiser helping military families in need. Below that, a photo of the flag-draped booth, Noah's letter framed discreetly in the background. Charlotte set down the dish towel she'd been using to polish the silverware. Fundraiser? She echoed carefully. Grayson shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. Yeah. Thought? Maybe we could do some good. You know, for families like Noah's. He shuffled the papers in his hand, looking embarrassed. I figured if you could change things around here with pancakes, maybe the rest of us could try. Charlotte smiled. Not the polite service smile she wore for customers, but something real, deep, and shining from the marrow. I think it's a wonderful idea, she said softly. Within a week, donation jars appeared at every table. Customers dropped in spare change, bills, checks. The diner buzzed with a new kind of energy, not gossip, not judgment, but purpose. A local hardware store donated supplies. A country band offered to play a benefit concert for free. A nearby bakery sent over trays of cookies with little notes. For our heroes and their families. Charlotte worked double shifts without complaint, pouring coffee, flipping pancakes, and gently reminding everyone why they were doing it. With nothing more than a smile, a nod, a hand on a shoulder. By the end of the first month, Maggie's Café had raised enough to start a small emergency fund for military families in the county. Families struggling with rent, groceries, gas to visit loved ones at distant bases. Mr. Grayson surprised everyone again when he matched the donations out of his own pocket. No speeches, no fanfare. Just a quiet check slid into the donation jar, his name never mentioned. One evening, long after the last customer left and the close sign flipped over on the door, Grayson approached Charlotte as she wiped down the booths. I never told you, he said gruffly, his voice strange in the empty diner. My old man? He used to feed every stray kid in the neighborhood. Charlotte straightened, sensing something heavy in his words. Drove my mother crazy, he said, chuckling under his breath. Didn't matter if we barely had enough ourselves. He always said, you never know whose son you're saving. Might be the kid who saves you someday. He rubbed his hands together awkwardly. I used to think it was stupid. He looked up, meeting Charlotte's eyes for the first time without flinching. But now, I think I get it. Charlotte didn't say anything. She just smiled, soft and steady. The kind of smile that said, I see you, I hear you, it's never too late. Outside, the first real snowstorm of the year had begun, blanketing the cracked sidewalks in pure, blinding white. Inside, Maggie's Café was warm, safe, steady, a place where no one, soldier or child or weary waitress, had to carry their hunger alone. As Charlotte flipped off the neon lights one by one, she paused by the corkboard behind the counter. The coins, the badges, the patches, they gleamed quietly in the darkness, stitched together by invisible threads of gratitude and grief and hope. This was no longer just a diner. It was a living memory, a promise kept, a kindness that had grown roots, silent and unstoppable in the most ordinary soil. Charlotte tucked Noah's letter into her apron pocket one last time for the night, feeling its comforting weight next to the challenge coin. She stepped outside into the swirling snow, pulling her coat tight against the wind. Above the diner, the American flag flapped proudly, the words on the plaque below it catching the light for a fleeting second, reserved for those who serve, and the families who wait. Charlotte smiled into the falling snow. One kindness. One plate of pancakes. One boy. And now, a ripple moving outward, bigger than she had ever dared imagine. Kindness wasn't loud. It didn't demand attention. It didn't always wear medals. Sometimes, kindness just wore an apron. And it changed the world anyway. The diner was nearly empty when it happened. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year to the day since Noah had first slipped through Maggie's front door, small and silent and unseen by everyone but her. Charlotte was wiping down the counter when she saw it. A small object resting quietly by her order pad, something she hadn't noticed before. She picked it up carefully. It was a coin. Another challenge coin. But this one was different. The front side bore the emblem of the United States Army Special Forces, just like the others. But the back was custom engraved, simple and spare. Semper Memor, always remembering, no name, no unit number, no explanation, just 2 words. 2 words that said everything. Charlotte glanced up sharply, heart pounding, searching the diner, the parking lot outside, the snowy sidewalks. Nothing. No SUVs. No soldiers standing at attention. Just the town waking up slowly, the streetlight still blinking sleepily against the pale morning. Whoever had left the coin had already gone. But their message remained. Charlotte turned the coin over and over in her hand, feeling the cool weight of it ground her. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Instead, she pressed the coin gently against her heart, closing her eyes for a long moment. Thank you, she thought. Not just for the coin. Not just for the memories. But for seeing her, too. For recognizing that a waitress in a faded apron could matter. That small kindnesses could ripple outward until they touched places and hearts she would never even know. She walked to the corkboard behind the counter and pinned the coin dead center. The coins, badges, patches, and notes surrounded it like constellations. A living memorial. A quiet promise stitched into the walls and floorboards of Maggie's Café forever. Mr. Grayson passed by, carrying a new wooden sign, freshly varnished and simple but strong. He set it up by the door without a word. It read, "Whoever you are, whatever you carry, whatever you can pay, no one leaves hungry." Charlotte smiled as she read it, her chest aching in the best possible way. She glanced at Mr. Grayson, who only shrugged awkwardly and muttered, "Figured it was time." Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the town in white. Inside, Maggie's Café glowed warm, a beacon against the cold. People came and went, some to eat, some to leave something behind. A coin, a badge, a note, a whispered memory. And somewhere out there, Charlotte liked to believe, Noah was growing up strong, loved, seen. Carrying a piece of Maggie's with him. Carrying her pancakes, her warmth, her silent faith that even the smallest kindness mattered. Charlotte tied on her apron, tucked Noah's framed letter a little straighter behind the counter, and picked up a fresh plate of pancakes. She slid it onto the reserve booth, still empty for now, but never really empty at all, because someone would need it. Someone always did. And when they came through that door, cold, hungry, maybe invisible to the world, Maggie's Café would be waiting, warm, steady, always remembering, always ready, always enough. Sometimes, the loudest heroes are the quietest souls. A simple plate of pancakes, a silent thank you, a life changed forever. Kindness doesn't need applause. It needs courage. It needs someone willing to stand alone in the silence and still choose to care. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment, share your own memories of kindness, and remember, no act of compassion is ever wasted. Someone, somewhere, is carrying your light. Thank you for believing in goodness. Thank you for remembering.